It's really more about protecting your state and the people of the state from the digital dollar and the horrors and terrors that come along with it.
Yeah. Could this skyrocket the price of gold and silver? We know there's healthy demand growth for gold in particular, with the world central banks buying a record amount of gold. But what about domestically in the United States? We have a number of states that are passing legislation to let their citizens reclaim their right to use gold and silver as legal tender, but an often overlooked and very important component to some of this legislation is the establishment of gold depositories in individual states. What could that do to the price of precious metals? Today, we have the honor to be joined by Mr. Pat Holland. He's real familiar with what's going on in the States and with gold and silver. Pat, welcome to Ron's Basement.
Hey, Ron, great to be back with you. Red shirts, man. Solidarity, solidarity.
The red shirt movement. That's right. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, all in support of you, Ron. Love the channel, love the red shirt, love the Bears. Hopefully wow. Susie isn't going to, hit you with some sort of lawsuit to burn the red shirt or anything like that.
We'll see. The basement is my domain after all. So you've got some fascinating insights about how these state depositories, where they could be holding gold, possibly silver, could impact the price of the metals. Would you please share some of your thoughts on that matter with us, Pat?
Absolutely. And once again, as a prelude to this beginning, I'm not one of the guys that's holding on to gold and silver, for becoming rich. That's never been, my true intention of stacking gold and silver. It's always been about savings and, of course, insurance. If you don't trust the dollar, what are you going to put your money into? Is it going to be into dollar denominated assets like in Wall Street, the stock market? Is it going to be into bonds, another dollar denominated asset? Is it going to be into any of those investments, basically are dollar denominated? Well, to a certain extent, gold and silver are as well, but they're actually, honest to God, real money. So you talked a little bit ago about central banks acquiring gold. Now, as silver, I don't know that they're acquiring silver, but they're acquiring gold. Why would they do that? Because, obviously the money's in the dollar denominated assets, right? Well, that's because it's Eastern central banks that are doing this. They're moving away from the dollar. Half the world, the BRIC nations are proof of this, are moving away from the dollar. So they're actually starting to acquire or accumulate, procure, if you will, gold. But what about your state? Your state has a treasury, a little central bank, a tiny one, if you will, that is holding on to bonds and treasuries, for state reserves. Part of the legislation that we deal with, and oh gosh darn it, I'm going to have to bring them up again. Tennessee. Tennessee in 2023 got a depository. Legislative, they got it done. It's attached to the treasury, and they're going to start acquiring gold and silver in their treasury, through the depository, through their brand new legislation. We tried to do this in Missouri too. Our legislation did not make it this year. Thank you, Dean Plocker, single-handedly deciding that Missouri can't have gold and silver. But that aside, think about it for a second, Ron. The resources that you and I have are quite limited compared to what a state has. And if a state wants to, get anywhere from 1 to 40% of its reserves that are normally held in treasuries or in bonds in gold and silver instead, that's going to affect, the price action, at least to a little bit. You would think supply and demand, basically with the treasury, taking in an enormous amount of precious metals. Now think of 50 separate treasuries around the United States getting gold and silver, just like the Eastern central banks are. Mm-hmm. I think that would probably affect the price on simple supply and demand economics alone.
Because let me throw this in. I think it's important for us to remember the price of silver and gold to a certain degree is determined by supply and demand. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty sensitive, right? It's like we know where the price is right now, but if we get a big increase in demand or even a marginal moderate increase, it could, we aren't making predictions, but it could translate into rather dramatic moves for price. Could.
Yeah. It absolutely could. Now, that's not a reason for having a depository. This is about survival here. Does your state want to go through a hyperinflation with the rest of the nation? Or do you want your state to be, somewhat financially sound as the dollar dies? Do you want your state government completely going away? Or do you want them to still exist to a certain extent? Do you want your state under the yoke of the federal government and the Federal Reserve with a digital dollar? I mean, these are questions we all have to ask ourselves. So now, and by the way, this is based on my work in the Missouri Freedom Initiative. We adhere to the Constitution, and we've not even taken an oath to it. We love the Constitution. We love the Bill of Rights. And the fact of the matter is, states are where your power is. It has never been in the federal government. Never. But that's what we're trained to believe, though, isn't it? I mean, the news shoves, the circus from Washington, D.C. at us all the time. So we're supposed to think that's where the real power is. That's where all the big decisions are made. It's absolutely untrue. It's your state, and it always has been your state. So for those who are watching what we're doing in the Missouri Freedom Initiative, vicariously, through Ron's channel or others, you could do something very similar to what we're doing in our state with our gold and silver legislation. And if the incentive is to become rich with gold and silver, well, there you go. If you want a depository in your state, it's not going to form by itself. Trust me. It's going to take action from the grassroots to get this kind of stuff done. Tennessee got one in 2023. That's the only state in 2023. And I think there were 8 states trying to get treasuries. But if there was more of a grassroots movement in 2023 in these other states, I think some of them would have probably have gotten this done. So
Texas has a depository. Is that right?
Yes, 2015. In 2015, they got their depository. That is correct. They started funding it in 2017, I think is what it is. And I had to refresh myself on those news stories. 2015, they got it. In 2017, they had it built, and they were starting to accumulate metals.
Can I ask you a question? And there's other states as well that have depositories that have established. To make this clear to the viewers, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what we're talking about then is a state like Tennessee being able to allocate part of their state wealth, I guess we'll call it, but maybe like reserves, money that's set aside to pay pension funds in the future. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars potentially that they can set aside part of that money or invest or insure, if you want to call it that, by investing or by buying things like silver and gold. That's right. Is that a safe assessment? Right.
That's a very safe assessment. In fact, that's the primary reason for having reserves is for your state pension fund. Now, it's not the only reason, but it is definitely the primary reason. And I just talked about the way I feel about gold and silver. I feel it is great savings and it's great insurance. I don't think it's a great investment vehicle for getting rich. And by the way, history has bore that out to be the truth, and that's because of manipulation. Okay, so let's all be clear on this. The manipulation is real. The pain is real, folks. And there's nothing the government's going to do to stop that manipulation because they are part of it. And I'm talking about the U.S. government. But at some point, everything succumbs to supply and demand. It happens.
Mother Nature wins. Mother Nature wins.
Yeah. Yep. So at any rate, that's another aspect of having a depository that I don't think we've really truly explored before, Ron. But it shouldn't be for that reason that you're actually into this. I would say it's really more about protecting your state and the people of the state from the digital dollar and the horrors and terrors that come along with it.
If you're looking to buy gold, silver, or platinum, do yourself a favor and check out Pimbex, the online precious metals bullion dealer and sponsor of Ron's Basement. I was a happy customer before they offered to support the channel. You'll find they have the best prices, quality, and service. I think Pimbex is best, and you will too. And be sure to tell them that you're from Ron's Basement. In some of the states, as I understand it, will allow the citizens to actually store, if they want, some of their metals at the deposit. I think Texas, is that the way you understand that as well?
Yes, it depends on the policies that they have. Like, for instance, Texas really is, by the way, Texas is an interesting case, and I don't have all the facts. So if I'm wrong on any of this, I apologize. But it looks to me like they're going to start opening up to the public. And they tried to get a bill done in 2023 to go to some kind of crypto that was literally backed by their own treasury.
Well,
So there was, I'm sorry,
they
treasury. I'm sorry, their own depository.
their depository, and I don't think I dug into that pretty deeply. I don't think they were calling it a crypto, but they were calling it, and maybe it's the same thing, I could be wrong, a digital currency.
Yeah.
But that it would be 100, and I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I really dug deep into this one, which I find it fascinating that it would be 100% backed by physical metal, and it would be audited on a regular basis. It would be regulated by the state depository. And I think one of the other key components of this proposition that they had was that you could show up at the state depository anytime you wanted and convert your digital token for actual real metal.
Yeah,
which
right.
which I think is, and that it might even be open to people, that they weren't going to limit it to the state of Texas. And it was fascinating. So I'm sorry I jumped on you there, but the Texas situation was very interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And also it gave ideas to other states. How can we somehow do the same thing and make a digital currency that is good in between states for trade? And this is something that, basically a lot of people, I would have to say a lot of people can't even wrap their brains around the fact that the states are worried about FedNow, about ESG, about social, digital, currencies, social credit scoring. They're worried. Some states are actually worried about this. Some states are embracing it, which is really scary. I hate to, for instance, California has mentioned that they're very much in favor of, that kind of financial environment. And I do believe many people in New York, however, New York is a liquid dynamic, actually, that New York might be shifting a little more towards a conservative route with some of the things they're going to do. And that's just because of the makeup of their state legislature. And once again, it's a state thing. So is a depository, basically for the state to actually say, yes, we have reserves. We're forming a vault. We're actually going to build a vault, and we're going to start storing some of our reserves in gold and silver as a hedge against the dollar, is one heck of a statement. So far, we know Utah has a depository, Texas has a depository, and now Tennessee is building a depository. States are seeing the writing on the wall. They really do.
Do you think, as the political environment continues to progress, as the deteriorate, yeah, that's the better word, social environment continues to deteriorate, as the economic and, let's say, monetary fiscal situation in the country could potentially continue to deteriorate, that we'll see more and more of a movement toward these state-based depositories as states potentially make moves to protect themselves and to protect their citizenry?
I think, and that's a complicated question. I appreciate the question very much, though. I think that there needs to be grassroots movements in all these states to push this stuff, because in some cases, states simply won't do it without pressure. So there's got to be some kind of cohesive network in your state to get this done, to keep going to those legislators and letting them know this is what we, the people, want. So, but to answer your question in the short version, the answer is yes, states are moving in that direction. They are definitely starting to see the dollar as not so much an asset, but, something to be
a problem.
Worried about. A problem. Yes. And by the way, and it's not because of the BRIC nations. I go up to Jefferson City and I'm talking about the BRICS. They have no clue what I'm talking about. Most of them, not all of them. Some of them do.
They say, look, yeah, sure, Pat, this building's made out of bricks. Look,
yeah,
right?
Pretty much. And so, believe it or not, you go to your state and you start talking to your senator and your representative, and you express concerns over the dollar now you're trying to give evidence, because once again, you're having a conversation with these politicians, and you start talking about the BRIC nations and them moving away from the dollar. and they've never heard of it before. You might be the one who's actually informing them of this for the very first time.
Yeah, that is crazy. That is just outright crazy. And I can't help but bring up the point that uh, the United States government and the United States dollar did a pretty good job of messing themselves up over the last 50 years. Let's say since Nixon took us off the gold standard in 71, under the best of circumstances, right? I mean, in a lot of ways, the United States was operating in an environment that was very conducive over the last 50 years overall. Now, if we look out over the next 50 years, with everything that's developing in the world with the BRICS and everything else, yeah, I think there's reason why some of the states are, let's say, growing a little concerned.
Yeah, and they should be. And by the way, right now, I am going to look up, at least as closely as I can, what the debt was. Now, I can't find it in 1971, but I can find it for 1980. Are you interested in what the U.S. debt was in 1980, Ron?
Sure, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, let's see. Looks like it was $907 billion.
Wow. We're just up like, what, 38 times from there at this point?
Something like that. That'd be about accurate. So our debt level has grown about 38 times. So I'm going to ask you some pointed questions. Has your income, in that same, actually that'd be a 43-year period. Has your income gone up some 28 times?
No.
It hasn't. Oh, that's a shame.
No.
So that means your income is not keeping up with inflation.
No, it's not.
Yeah. So, I mean, actually, guys, I know it sounds rudimentary and very, very simple, but I'm trying to be as elegant as possible to explain that 34 trillion, $32 trillion of debt is just the beginning, gang.
Yeah. And let me throw this in, Pat, because I'm going to get your comment on this regarding the point you're making.
Yep.
We also have to recognize that not only is the debt going up, but it's also accelerating at a much faster pace, right? I mean, it's not like it's just going like this. It's going whoop, like a hockey stick.
Well, it has to, because we got to pay interest on that debt. They got to print, and the Federal Reserve prints the principal only. They don't print the interest. So the interest is paid for out of existing principal. And when they're sucking the principal out of the system with higher interest rates, you're going to get into a situation where there's a lot of folks hurting financially very bad, businesses going bankrupt, individuals going bankrupt, all because of all that money they printed during COVID. Now, the previous money they did before that has something to do with it too. Trust me, I get that. I'm sorry, I'm calling it money. It's currency. It's funny money, Yeah. So, but that's the etymology of the inflation we're in right now, is all that money or currency that was printed during COVID. They're not going to stop. They're going to have to bring more money in. And either it's through the printing press or it's through other nations giving up their dollars because they're not going to be using it for oil trade anymore. When OPEC, or the head of OPEC, Saudi Arabia, joins the BRICS, everyone better be listening. I mean, this affects us all, gang. This is big, big, big financial news. And the mainstream media is glossing over. They're too busy giving us mugshots of Trump, as you stated in the earlier video. That's what they're giving us. That's what they're giving us. Something that's going to affect me, my kids, my grandkids, everyone I know. The value of the dollar being affected by the BRIC nations, and the mainstream media doesn't consider it important enough to tell me. Yeah. You should know where to get your media, folks. It's certainly not from the mainstream.
It's back page news at best. And I believe it is probably the biggest story of the decade. Pat, thank you again for your time. If people want to learn more about you, about your organization, Missouri Freedom Initiative, what's the best way to get in touch?
You bet. The best way is to go to our website, mofree.org. It's under construction. We're building it again from the ground up. Lots of new innovations coming into it, including a forum for states that want to engage in gold and silver legislation. And you know what? If your state doesn't have legislation, what's stopping you from actually downloading a copy of the Missouri legislation and giving it to your senator and your representative and say, I want this in my state? Nothing is stopping you. Nothing. And the more people who do it, the better. It doesn't matter if there's 100 people in Florida, and came close to that number with all the emails I got, in 2023. If 100 people in Florida all went to their representatives and senators and said, we want silver and gold legislation in our state, believe it or not, something would happen. It's up to you,
Things
gang.
start moving. Yeah.
Yep.
So as the world moves towards gold and silver, as individuals in the United States, people like me and you choose to be our own central bank, we're having a growing number of states. And within that growing number of states, there's a growing number that are setting up their own depositories. It can't be bad for the value, real value of silver and gold. And we really appreciate you joining us again today, Pat. Can we look forward to talking to you again sometime in the future?
Absolutely. I'll be back. The red shirt crew will be back, gang. We'll be back. And thank you, Ron. Thank you for entertaining having the Missouri Freedom Initiative on your channel and talking about the work that we're doing in the state that we both live in. Because silver and gold is very important to both of us, but silver and gold legislation is critical to us.
Agreed. We'll see you soon, Pat. Thank you.
God bless you, man.